Welcome to another weekly edition of our StaySmart newsletter and podcast, brought to you by Vicinity Corporate Housing, where we try to keep you updated on what we see happening in the industry. I hope this is beneficial to you and to your company. Standing here in front of Lewis and Clark in St. Charles, Missouri. I'm here this week for the Midwest ERC conference. I thought this would be a good location representing St. Charles. So I'll go ahead and jump right into the articles that we have for you. The first article is about rent increases. The apartment industry, we saw rent increases in March throughout the U.S., 0.3 to 0.5% according to Zumper. So not huge rent increases, but slight rent increases that we saw for most markets. In particular, this article talks about Arizona and kind of the Sun Belt and kind of mountain states, so Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, maybe seeing rent decreases there, where the rest of the country is mostly seeing rent increases. So Arizona, it's really a supply issue. A lot of supplies come online, in particular like Phoenix and Glendale and Scottsdale, and so they're seeing rent decreases there. But we're seeing in other markets in the Northeast and the Midwest, like New York City, having really big rent increases. It mentions Columbus, Ohio, in the Midwest seeing solid rent increases. So really based on where you're at, you're still seeing rent increases for most markets and rent decreases in some markets like Arizona. So good information there. And we also saw this week CPI came out. Obviously inflation was up, but in particular shelter was up, and this kind of matches what we saw in the CPI, the cost of shelter and rent increases up in March. The next article we have is about Booking.com ending their sustainable travel program. The Netherlands, the ACM, which is their kind of consumer protection division in the Netherlands, sued Booking.com, said this is misleading to travelers. So Booking.com is taking that down, kind of backpedaling a little bit. You don't know if you know, Booking.com had little green leaf icons for sustainable options on their sites, and the Netherlands had said this is misleading, doesn't represent sustainability in this space, and so Booking.com is ending that travel program. It's interesting because we talk a lot on this podcast about sustainability. I'm actually involved in a session here at the Midwest ERC this week talking about diversity and sustainability. So it's still important to clients. I think clients are still asking for this. So it's hard sometimes though for suppliers to make their options, whether it's short-term travel or relocation or temporary housing, a sustainable option. So interesting information about Booking.com having to backpedal a little bit with their sustainable options. And then the next article after that is about U.S. Congress setting aside $50 million to try to decrease the wait times on visas. And I think this is interesting because we've talked about this in the past, that we've seen the wait times on visas at hundreds of days. And particularly we saw some locations, this article talks about Brazil and Colombia, India, and those are all at hundreds of days. The U.S. World Cup's coming up in 2026. I think a lot of those locations are wanting to make sure that people can make those travel arrangements for 2026. So Congress, $50 million. I don't know if that's enough to make a dent in this, to bring that down, but we'll see. Really good information. Also not in this article, though, we saw starting on April 1st, the cost of visas going up, particular visas like the H-1B going up 50%. So I don't know if that's some of the funding that they're going to use to try to decrease the wait times on those visas, but good information there. And then finally is about the airline industry. Here's a plane going over right now, kind of interesting. Airlines, supply and demand, we talk a lot about that right on this podcast. And globally, we expect to see 4.7 billion people fly this year versus a peak in 2019 of 4.5 billion. So more people than ever are flying. But in particular in the US, there's just the delivery of airlines or aircrafts are down. Because, in particular, this article mentions Boeing. It's been in the news. They've had some issues recently, and that's decreased the number of aircraft that they've been able to deliver to airline carriers. And so what's interesting in this article, I think, is that a boom in the aircraft leasing segment. So airlines are leasing aircraft to kind of meet that demand. That may have a dent in their profit margin, but that's what they're doing in the short term, at least, to meet demand. So those are the articles that I saw this week. If there's something you'd like to hear us talk about, I'd love to hear your feedback. Please leave your comments here. And if you have anything else you'd like to see us talk about, let us know. But that's what I see transitioning this week. Take care, everyone.